Welcome, everyone, to Rev'd Up for Sunday from New Canaan, Connecticut, St. Mark's Episcopal Church. I'm Elizabeth Garnsey.
I'm Justin Crisp.
And I'm Peter Walsh.
And today we have Jesus, wait for it, the nice guy. Jesus is nice today, and he's talking to the scribes they're questioning him about the greatest commandments. And out of 613, he has to pick the best one. Interestingly, this Sunday coincides with Halloween, so we might find a few interesting tie-ins to All Hallows and All Hallows Eve. So, shall we go? Okay, the Gospel according to St. Mark. One of the scribes came near and heard the Sadducees disputing with one another, and seeing that Jesus answered them well, he asked him, "Which commandment is the first of all?" Jesus answered, "The first is, 'Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind and with all your strength. The second is this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these." Then the scribe said to him, "You are right, teacher. You have truly said that he is one and beside him there is no other. And to love him with all the heart and with all the understanding and with all the strength, and to love one's neighbor as oneself, this is much more important than all whole burnt offerings and sacrifices." When Jesus saw that he answered wisely, he said to him, "You are not far from the kingdom of God." After that, no one dared to ask him any question. The Gospel of the Lord. Pretty good. So I have to pick a bone with the very last sentence already because did they really dare not ask him any more questions? Maybe not. Maybe not for the rest of the Gospel, but I think centuries of questions for Jesus have followed. But anyway, this is a great Gospel. It's one of my favorites, actually. So anyone have a opening pitch?
Well, Peter, you were talking about how many laws there actually are, and I think you brought a list to do a dramatic reading of on the podcast.
Go get a cup of coffee.
Yeah, why were you counting laws? I'm just curious.
Well, I had this incredible passage, and as we were talking before we turned all the rest of you on, as said in all commentaries, by Jesus' day, there are 613 laws, 613. And the question here is not which is the first, but which is the most important, which is primary. And Jesus gives us a bonus, right? So he names the Shema, to love the Lord your God with all your heart and your mind and your soul and your strength. And then we get a bonus here, right? We get the bonus of the second commandment, which it comes from the book of Leviticus. So I couldn't help myself, and I launched into the book of Leviticus to find out where this was. And so in the book of Leviticus, we get in the neighborhood of this, Leviticus chapter 19, verse 18. "Do not seek revenge or bear a grudge against anyone among your people, but love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord." And in the context of the book of Leviticus, it's actually could be interpreted as being, do not love your Jewish neighbor. Do not do anything against, this could be a Jewish thing or within the people of Israel. But also on this page, there was a lot of other things that caught my eye. Do not mate different kinds of animals. Do not plant your field with two kinds of seed, and do not wear clothing woven of two kinds of material. So just to get I'll leave off the other 610, but that'll be the addendum to this. I'll get to the other 610 laws. But anyway, Jesus pairing the Shema with this piece that's not actually even a whole piece from the book of Leviticus. So it's not new material, but he's putting it together in a particular way.
Yeah, I have to say, I really love. It sounds a little weird, but I love "you shall love your neighbor as yourself" because it's the neighbor is the person who's right next to you. It sounds like it is an incredibly tall order to fulfill, right? But it's also circumscribed in a way that makes it possible for us as limited, finite, ordinary beings, period, to at least aspire to fulfill it. So there's this. I've been thinking while I was looking at this looking at this passage in the last couple of days, thinking about I don't know if it's apocryphal or if it actually happened. I can't even remember where I came across it, but an Anglican priest who teaches at Oxford, Graham Ward, got into a debate with the famous postmodern philosopher Jacques Derrida. And Derrida, in this debate, was talking about how he felt moral paralysis around feeding his cat in the morning. He's like, I can't stand to feed my cat because all that I do when I try to feed my cat is I think about all the other cats in the world that are starving. And then I feel incredible, paralyzing guilt because I'm feeding my cat, but I'm not feeding all the other cats in the world. And Professor Ward comes back and says, well, I'm really sorry about that. That sounds like a miserable condition it sounds pretty miserable for your morning routine. But as a Christian, I don't actually have that problem because what we're given is this command by Jesus as the summary of the law, which he's inheriting from his, Jesus is not alone in this. It's a rabbinic kind of trademark by this time. But what Jews and Christians both share is this command to love your neighbor as yourself. It's not all the cats in the world that I'm responsible for feeding. It's the cat who's in front of me. The cat that God has given me to love. That's who I'm supposed to love. And so part of the discernment, and I know Jesus gets into this in other gospels, in other disputes with people, who is my neighbor? That's really the question. But we don't have this like crippling universal law which none of us can ever aspire to fulfill. Rather, it's like we're thrown into our lives and we have people who are close to us, and they're the ones who we've been called by God to love. Not that we don't have to love anybody who doesn't live next to us, but our obligations to them are the people who God has put in front of us. The cat that God has given me to feed, not all the cats in the world. And in a world where there's just too much going on, I find that to be incredibly consoling. Because if you just open up the page, look at the front page of the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, you could just be like, well, I'm ready to give up on the moral life. I'm just going to go back to bed. And that's not actually what we're supposed to do. We should look at, well, who's in my path today? Who's right next to me? Who has God given me to love today?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it gets right to the Good Samaritan story.
Absolutely.
It's easy to pass by on the other side of that path.
Yeah.
To avoid the person. And I think Jesus he was always in the business of inner transformation in the service of love. And, he does add this second commandment, and I think it's Matthew or one of the other Gospels. This same exchange occurs, I think, in all the synoptics. And one of them says, the second is like unto it, or maybe that's just the King James and one of them, but one says, and the second is like it. Or we say that also in our prayer book at our Rite 1 8:00 service. The second is like unto it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. So to love your neighbor is to love God. And I love that Cynthia Bourgeault translates this as you shall love your neighbor as an extension of yourself, which I really like, because it's not necessarily love your neighbor, do unto others as you would have them do to you, as much as see their whole being as yourself, as you, their loneliness is your loneliness. Their suffering is your suffering. The world's, and their, by extension, it is overwhelming, but I think that once, when a person does the work of the inner life, and we begin to not be burdened by that responsibility, but it becomes a way of seeing and a way of being, and there's a flow. So, I think when we feel overburdened or overwhelmed, we think that we have it within us, or we should have it within us to feed the world. But really, what we have flows out, and then there's no kind of getting overburdened. You're never carrying it. You're just like letting the gift of love flow through, and there's a lightness to it. Jesus had a real lightness in his ability to move through crowds and, really take in the person in front of him and then go on his way, and the person's life changed forever. And he didn't, carry that with him or stew about how to do it or anything like that, or I'm in a rush. He never had any of those hang-ups. So I don't know. I think that there's more to it than, do I have enough to feed this cat or this neighbor? It's sort of like, a flow issue, but I don't know.
I was wondering how you were going to get from cat for a little while there. I was really, it's interesting to hear your reflections. For me, as I've grown and aged with the gospel and this passage in particular, it has become more meaningful to me. I think when I was newer to the gospel, I was like, okay, yep, I got it right, keep moving. And as I've gotten older, I've had more time to reflect on the meaning of life and what the meaning of my life and what's the meaning of the life that's in front of me. And for me, there's a kind of simplicity in it, and that it grows out of the being of God. If we understand God as love, and that the being of God is the being of love, and then how are we to be in relationship with the being that is love, from whom all things flow? Well, it is consonant, and it is the language of love, the disposition of love in the heart toward the divine, and toward the world, is to mean that we're all aligned with the ultimate first movement of the universe, which is divine love, and that the fullness of who we become in our lives is to the degree that we love, and that we love in this bloom of light. And whether or not it's to your cat, I mean, you just literally had a cat die recently, or the people in front of you, or the disposition you might feel for the people of Haiti, for instance. I mean, which has an unstopping litany of bad news that pours out, and how we feel about all this. So I think that the Gospels and the biblical teachings about love, Corinthians teaching, 1 Corinthians 13 about love. The golden rule, which is in all scriptures, and Confucius and all wisdom teachings. That basically, if you have to talk about what is the meaning of life, what are you supposed to be doing, it is love. Mm-hmm. And then you might pick and parse how you would think of that word love, caritas, or one of the other definitions of the word love. But so I think he's got this. This to my mind is the foundational. And if you had to just take 2 or 3 sentences from the scriptures and say, if someone says, I can't read all that stuff, what's it all about? You just give them this, and you're getting on the way to giving them. I mean, I think this is that central, that big a piece. Oh yeah, to it. It comes up every lectionary cycle. I'm reminded listening to the two of you that Elizabeth, I really like your I like what you're saying about Jesus' way has a kind of lightness to it once you align yourself with the flow. I'm reminded of, I'll just say, my favorite thing that Jesus says is, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Yeah. And so yoke in this period is a kind of shorthand for a rabbi's interpretation of the law, right? So you got all the 600 commands, 600 laws, and there were rabbis who were around and teaching, and they were teaching people how to fulfill all of those laws. And they would call their particular interpretation of the law their yoke. And so he's saying, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. And that's what we see here. If he gives us the summary of the law here, and then you add on the new commandment that he gives the disciples in John to love one another as he has loved them, that's it. I mean, that's the law for Jesus. And it doesn't even strike me as a law. It strikes me as a way of being, right? Elizabeth, you're fond of the saying of Augustine, order your loves and then do as you will, or something like that. Yeah. It is kind of like if you get your heart right, and then you just live. And I think getting your heart right is partly like getting your heart right in alignment with God, which is where, we've been talking about the neighbor bit, but you start out with, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind. And some early theologians who I do really love really struggle with this, because they're like, well, if I'm supposed to love the Lord with all my heart, do I have anything left to give to my neighbor? Augustine was actually one of these people. It's very hard, actually, for Augustine in his theology to motivate love of neighbor, because it's all about God. Augustine, who said, our hearts are restless until they find their rest in thee. Well, if my heart is resting in my cat, or my heart is resting in my love for the two of you, for the people of the parish, or for my wife, Jewel, is it resting in God? And Augustine is really
ambiguous on the question.
yeah.
It's kind of, it's a huge, if you give all your heart to God, do you have anything left? And I think that he was worrying about something that you don't actually have to worry about. As you were saying,
Yeah.
loving your neighbor is loving God. Or as Kierkegaard says, all of our love for God is like a letter with a forwarding address. And the forwarding address is our neighbor. God just sends all of it on to our neighbors all the time. So that by loving our neighbors, we're loving God. And by loving God, we're loving our neighbors.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
That's why these two are together.
Yeah.
I love Augustine. I wouldn't call him a mystic, really, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Saint Teresa of Avila, maybe you
Yeah.
could tell us about this, but I think she talked about love as a mirror, maybe, and was it her or Teresa of Lisieux?
I can't remember.
One of the
off top of my
Teresas.
head. Do you
I
remember?
think called love a mirror, or some of the mystics, anyways, talk about this in multiple traditions about love, love being a mirror because whatever comes in front of it is the honest look at what it is. It just lets it be itself and receives good, bad, ugly, and then easily lets it go. It sort of reflects what it is, sees what it is for the reality it embodies, and then if it departs the mirror, easily lets it go. There's this kind of reception of the whole image, and then the non-judging presence. And so to be the love of God as a mirror to the world, sort of see, I see, and we let ourselves be seen that way too, like, all of our shadow sides and dark sides, and psychology even says you have to love all of it in order to have wholeness. Whole love is wholeness. And I think when the mystics talk about that, the mirror is the way that God loves. We're made in the image of God, and our whole selves are an image of God. Our loneliness, our longing, our need for one another. I think need for connection. It's all of a piece. Like it's all the wholeness. So I think that for Augustine to separate God from cat or wife or colleagues or friends, that's a really dualistic way to see the world, and I think it comes up problematic in the end. But all respect to Augustine, whose brain was about 55 million times bigger than mine.
Yeah, mine too.
But I think that there is a progression in the ability to see in a more see as the mystics see and talk about these two commandments as one.
Totally.
The way Jesus did. I love how it rolls off Jesus' tongue. He has no hesitation, like, which one is the greatest? He's just automatically embodies these two.
Yeah.
And I can't tell if in this part where the scribe said to him, "You're right, teacher," as if it was a quiz, or is this the scribe saying, "Wow, you're right, that's true," is it his moment of enlightenment? And then Jesus affirms him, you are right. You are not far from the kingdom of God, because the scribe, repeats that Jesus was right. So I think that's sort of interesting that Jesus or the scribe has a moment of epiphany, maybe, that, oh, wow, all this time I've been stewing over 613 laws, and really this is all I need to know. I like to read it that way, but because it's a big statement to say this is more important than all whole burnt offerings and sacrifices. I mean, their whole system was built on temple sacrifice, and to not do that would be to be not in good standing in their community, right?
Well, yeah, interesting. I mean, this is taking place in the temple courtyards where the teaching is happening, and obviously the scribe is part of the religious machinery of that. I love the response by the scribe, and I take it as straight up. And what I like about it is almost the historicity of it. He's a scribe. He's the one who studies the scriptures. And how does he respond? He responds with quoting the scriptures.
Yeah.
And we get a lot of it. And he's quoting from different books of the scriptures. So I actually think this might have some thumbprints of a real conversation, so to speak, as we have. Jesus is literally, how do you talk with a biblical scribe? This is what it might sound like. I believe that it's very likely the scribe had all this stuff at the tip of his tongue too. And it is a big deal for him to say that love is greater than the cultic activities of the temple life. And I think that sort of thing comes, back to this question of Augustine, who I have a great love for. I named my fourth kid after him. So, and I completely understand Augustine's getting tripped up over all this. And I think that this thing is, in some sense, more radical than we might take with this. And so, for people who are seeking holiness, so people who are seeking life within the divine being, coming alive within their being, what is the way? And so, for heavy-duty church people, heavy-duty temple people, heavy-duty synagogue people, heavy-duty mosque people, or whatever your place of peopleness might be, what of those pieties might bring you the being of God within your being? And with the Sadducees saying, this love thing is bigger than all of these pieties. And so I think that there's actually a lot to that we might miss. And also with reference to this, the first is, Jesus lays it out, bambo, the first is, and it's love of God. And I don't think that's not a no-brainer, particularly when you're like, do you think God exists? This is a crazy idea. Now, okay, so now I can come to the being of God. I can say, I believe there is a divine, there is an otherness out there, and then how does it get to be personal? Like, okay, so now that the higher power, how does the higher power then have a name? Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, Yahweh has a name, and then does that name mean anything to your name? And how does it get personal? How do you fall in love? What is love? The disposition of loving God, not just for what God might do for you, but but speaking of Teresa, the highest love that you might have for a divine being that has love for you. That is not a no-brainer here.
No.
And by putting that out there first, that's the fundamental thing that we are created for. The image of God is to be made in love and for love, and that the primary thing is to love the divine. Well, then, holy smokes, if the state of Connecticut is the 46th or 47th least religious state in the Union, for people in Connecticut, this can be a really, really challenging, thing.
No, I hear
divine
you.
Being.
I'm thinking of G.K. Chesterton. It said, great things can only be understood on small stages. And I feel like,
Wow, that is a cool statement.
It is a great statement.
Wow.
I wish I'd thought of it myself. But I feel like there's something to that in the sense that God, makes us in God's image, and our responsibility is to love one another. And that's how we love God. And I think that's kind of what Jesus gets at in these exchanges about love. We should wrap up so people aren't getting too much, but a word about Halloween, 30 seconds. I have to preach on Halloween. And apparently Halloween is the second most popular holiday in our culture.
Is that right?
Wow.
Next
Nice.
to Christmas.
I'm into that.
Who would have guessed
I know. But I also...
Poor Easter, but also cool.
Yeah, but no, I think in the culture, Halloween trumps Easter.
Oh, totally. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
I totally believe that.
And I read something really interesting about this with Halloween, that
wow.
when else do our neighborhoods open up our doors to children and hand out gifts freely and, receive the gremlins and goblins and angels and princesses all alike, pat them on the head, say they're beautiful, give them sweetness. And, I think that's kind of special, upside down kind of icon to think about, Halloween being a little moment of loving our neighbors as ourselves. They're not checking voter registrations of the parents or vaccine cards, and we're just opening our doors. And I think that's kind of a beautiful picture of what Halloween can look like.
I know that we can love via sugar. That's really good. We talked several weeks ago about
that's cool.
salt.
I
Which
think
is
that dropped
my
out of
jam.
the early
Right.
manuscripts.
Did it?
Jesus had sugar in there originally.
Yeah, totally. No, that's incredibly beautiful. I love that.
Yeah.
That's a way to reclaim, perhaps, our secular observation of Halloween as a spiritual practice.
Yeah.
Given that Halloween, although it certainly also has pagan roots, but also I think Halloween is a Christian holiday.
Yeah,
it's
All
the
Hallows
eve of All
Eve.
Hallows Eve.
Yeah.
It's the eve of the Feast of All Hallows.
Preparing to
All
honor our saints.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Oof. Okay, well, we need a second installment for this one. But anyway, we'll have to just wait for a sermon. Thanks for joining us today. We're so happy to be continuing on this path, getting revved up for Sunday. So join us at church on Sunday by stream or in person. And please like, rate, subscribe, and share this podcast wherever you watch it. And thanks for joining us. Have a blessed week.